and sustainability. And at the Nicholas Institute, we are standing up a project called Energy Pathways USA, which is a regional wing of the Energy Transitions Commission. And together we seek to put forward policies and ideas and build coalitions around efforts to reach net zero targets. We recognize, of course, that the hard work in reaching those targets will happen in large part in the private sector. And so we build together coalitions of leading private sector voices on the net zero quest. And that's what we have done. If you'll indulge me for one moment in a report that we're launching today, Pathways to Net Zero for the U.S. Energy Transition. For those in person, we have some copies there towards the door. For those who are watching this on video, please check out our site and you can readily download that. While we were producing this report, the landscape kind of shifted beneath us because the Inflation Reduction Act passed. And so we had to scramble, but it's one of those good problems, of course, because we are amending our work and our thinking and our outlooks to respond to the most potentially impactful climate legislation in the history of U.S. efforts to address climate change. But we try to say this in the report, and I think that this will come out in our discussions today. The IRA is no panacea, and there are different ways to contextualize the amount of investment and the amount of effort embedded within it. On the one hand, the estimated roughly $370 billion of investment that the IRA will engender towards this net zero goal is a big number, and it's certainly bigger than the sorts of investments that we've seen, particularly out of Congress in the past. But we compare that with an estimation over the 10-year period in which the IRA will be implemented of U.S. GDP cumulatively around $300 trillion. We compare that to the $1.9 trillion that we spent on the American Rescue Plan during the COVID crisis in 1 year. And so it clearly is going to have to galvanize larger investments from different sources, and that's going to be where we see our private sector movers in addition to other places. So with that, I want to get out of the way and hand the microphone over to my colleagues. I'll just introduce them very, very briefly. And we're going to have a fairly informal and interactive conversation. We'll begin with hearing some of what they're doing in their own operations and move back to some of these more macro issues on the policy landscape in the latter half. We'll begin in just a moment with Alex Liftman, who's the Global Environment Executive at Bank of America. Moving then to Allison Taylor, Chief Sustainability Officer at ADM. Catherine Nebe, Chief Sustainability Officer at Duke Energy. Niklas Gustafsson, Head of Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Volvo, and Roger Martella, Chief Sustainability Officer at GE. The folks who are really paying attention in the room now will recognize that we're trying to cross a lot of different sectors here, and so we think that we're going to have some complementary perspectives. I want to begin with you, Alex. You've reached carbon neutrality in your own operations at Bank of America, bravo. And you have a goal of net zero emissions across your entire value chain by 2050, which sounds really daunting to me. So what are the key steps you're taking now to decarbonize that value chain? And what are the challenges in just monitoring and understanding the embedded emissions in the value chain itself? Let me hand you my other microphone, excuse me.
Well, thank you first off for having me here today and for bringing together this great group of colleagues. Really looking forward to this morning. So at Bank of America, we have committed to achieve net zero emissions across, to your point, our whole value chain. So our operations, our supply chain, but probably most importantly, the emissions associated with our financing, and we're going to do that before 2050. We have a long history of reducing emissions in our operations. We set our first greenhouse gas emissions goals back in 2005, so 17 years ago, and have reduced emissions in our operations by 63% towards our goal to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030, which is in line with the science. And we've been working with our supply chain for many, many years to really get our suppliers to put in place their own greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. We think somewhere in the order of $20 billion we deploy on an annual basis in our supply chain. So that's critically important for them to have their own emissions targets or renewable energy targets. But that's also work that we've been doing for a long time. The new frontier, if you will, was the part of the commitment that we set just last April when we launched our net zero goal across the whole of our value chain to bring in what are called financed emissions. So emissions associated with our business activity, with the lending and investments that we do with clients. And actually, many of our clients are here today. And that is a much more complicated proposition. So we are simultaneously working with peers to establish the methodology for how you calculate it, to try and get some consistency across the financial industry. Setting baselines across our financing activity on a sector-by-sector basis. And just in April, we set our first targets to reduce the emissions intensity in our energy, our power generation, and our auto manufacturing sectors. And obviously, the most important part of the equation is we're working across our businesses to weave emissions and weave those targets into how we work with our clients on a day-to-day basis and make decisions around the lending and investments toward those targets. So it is very complex. It's always complex when you start off trying to measure and set targets in an area where there's no set methodology, but we're making a lot of progress. We're committed to the journey. We've got a lot of peers that are committed to the journey alongside us. And most importantly, we have a lot of clients that are committed to the journey alongside us, because we wouldn't be able to meet our goals if we didn't have clients that were moving towards net zero themselves.
You know, you brought up methodology and accounting multiple times in that answer. Where's the starting point on that? There are, of course, a lot of different initiatives out in the landscape that seek to put some continuity around that kind of standards-based measurement and accountability. Where are you beginning, and how do you kind of drive the sort of continuity that you were just discussing?
Yeah, and I will say that this is something that we are really focused on, and in fact, our CEO is incredibly focused on streamlining all of the different reporting standards, and has worked over many years to create a more streamlined reporting framework through the International Business Council. But as it relates to financed emissions specifically, there's an organization called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials that is a collaboration of financial institutions, including banks, but also asset managers and other financial institutions. And that's really the group that we're working with to set the methodologies. But while we've set some methodologies in areas like lending, methodologies for things like capital markets are still to come.
Thank you. Thank you. You anticipated my next question for you, Alex, when you talked about the investments that you're making in some of the sectors and companies represented here elsewhere on the panel. How are you working with your clients to drive capital, particularly to new technologies and approaches that are going to help them decarbonize their own efforts?
So I talked about how we were sort of an early adopter of greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, particularly in the financial industry. We were also the first financial institution to put in place a big financing commitment, to say back then it was 20 billion and it seemed so unattainable in 2007, but to say we're going to dedicate a certain amount of business activities and lending and the like to really driving new clean energy and clean tech technologies. So we have a commitment to deploy $1.5 trillion by 2030 across all of the sustainable development goals, and we've earmarked $1 trillion of that for climate and environmental related activities. Last year we deployed 155 billion in 1 year, and that's going to a couple of things. Well, it's going to a wide plethora of things, as you can imagine, but we're really trying to scale the activities we're already doing today, like green bonds. We were the first corporate issuer of a benchmark green bond back in 2013, and we've really helped to drive the green bond market. So that's something that's in place, and a lot of corporate issuers are using green bonds to help to fund, raise capital for their various activities. So we want to scale something like that. At the same time, and you talked about the IRA, we want to use the expertise that we've developed. We're the largest tax equity investor. Well, it goes back and forth. One of the largest or the largest, depending upon the day, in wind and solar here in the U.S. We help to fund 16%, I think, of all operating assets today. We want to take that type of expertise and put it towards new technologies like hydrogen, like carbon capture, other technologies that are supported through the IRA and through the tax bill. So whether it's driving, scaling what we're already doing today or scaling up what we need to be doing tomorrow, that's really what we're focused on.
Thanks so much. That's a really great scene setting for us. We're going to be hearing about some of these emerging technologies elsewhere on the panel, and we're going to move on at this point, but please do note, panel members and audience members, if I do my job correctly, we'll have some time to react to each other, so please be prepared to do so. Allison, since joining ADM, you've ushered in a raft of greenhouse gas and energy intensity reduction targets, and I want to start with a specific program that you announced with Pepsi recently, just this past September. It's a 7.5-year partnership, and it's going to spur regenerative agriculture across 2 million acres by 2030. So tell us what the main challenges were in building a partnership like that. And what do you see as its potential, not just for your companies, but for the landholders involved?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Just a word about ADM because it fits into why we would do something called regenerative agriculture. We're in the agriculture sector and really a middle company, if you will, where we don't own farms and we don't have brands on grocery store shelves, but a lot of the things that you buy and you eat are going to have our ingredients in them. So we are a sourcer. We source raw materials from all over the world, row crops and specialty crops, citrus, nuts, etc. We have a flavors business. We do a lot in the nutrition space, innovating in nutrition as well. Plant proteins, alternative proteins, insect proteins even. The food space is fast moving and really fast moving in the sustainability area. And one place in which we see a real core competence or sweet spot for ADM is in regenerative agriculture. So we don't own farms, but we talk to farmers every day. We have about 220,000 or so in our supply chains globally, about 60,000 in the United States. And one of our customers, PepsiCo, with the agreement that we announced recently, is a great partner for incentivizing regenerative agriculture practices. And we really need that partnership. The entire agriculture value chain, it really needs to come together when it comes to sustainability initiatives to motivate from farm to fork, if you will. We need a lot of cooperation. And PepsiCo realized that. For a farmer to change practices, so let's say cover cropping or no-till or less inputs or alternative inputs that are greener, it's not only a change mindset, but it's also a financial investment. And we find that there are a lot of folks talking about farmers and what farmers should do, but not so many talking to farmers as PepsiCo and ADM do directly. That company's understanding of what motivates farmers as well as our long-standing relationships was really a natural partnership. So PepsiCo has taken a pledge to have, I think, 7 million regenerative agriculture acres in their supply chains. And the agreement that we forged with them represents a 2 million acre commitment, and I wouldn't be surprised if we exceed that. This is an agreement that is a cost share, so they will share cost with us and with farmers to create these practices along these acres. We're reaching out to farmers, they're reaching out to farmers, and we're talking to them about the business case for regenerative agriculture. If you cover crop, for instance, your farm is likely to be more resilient to drought, to floods, to some of the extreme weather conditions that we're certainly all experiencing with climate change. Fewer inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, that saves money as well. So there's a real business case to these business people, and our companies are coming together to convey that. It's a very strong signal to the farmer when our customer is with us. They're used to dealing with us. We buy their crops, but to see that market standing before them, it's really motivating. Also to have a different voice talking about why regenerative agriculture is important to the consumer. The consumer is looking for more and more information on their food. And so we find that this is a partnership that not only secures our supply chains, resilient supply chains are very good for us, but it also gives us the opportunity to talk with our customer, with the farmer, about biodiversity and reducing water and inputs, and some of the broader reasons for regenerative agriculture beyond just sequestering carbon and reducing input.
Thanks, Allison. That's a very comprehensive description of the importance of regenerative agriculture in your own operations and elsewhere. I do want to press you a little bit on where you landed, though. What does this mean for decarbonization? How do you view the role of the agriculture sector in the United States vis-a-vis the net zero commitments? And that includes the input-based companies like your own that are supplying the materials that we need for the system.
Yeah, no doubt that agriculture is a major contributor to climate change, to carbon emissions globally. Land use is the major contributor. And to have the agriculture value chain come together and recognize that, and recognize we all have a part in that, is really key. And also to motivate farmers who don't necessarily see a reason to change. They know that they're very, very close to the environment. They depend on the environment. So to have trusted voices come in and say, yes, but there's more that we can do, I think is really important. From a carbon sequestration point of view, cover cropping is one of the key methods, or no-till as well, for keeping carbon in the soils. And we can actually measure that. There are models to measure that. There's soil sampling that can measure that, and there's also developing technology, which we're very excited about, artificial intelligence, to help us to measure that, so that a farmer is not going to go out and do soil sampling and wouldn't have to. So part of what we're doing as a part of this partnership is we're tracking continuous improvement on the farm. So we're tracking and measuring the benefits of regenerative agriculture. Part of that is sequestration, part of that is water use, part of that is input reduction, and biodiversity enhancement, pollinator habitats, for instance. A lot of measurements that we're going to be sharing with the public in an aggregated form. Farmers very much care about their data and the privacy of their data. That's one of the things that we talk about as well. But we know that we need to demonstrate the progress that we're making.
Thanks, Allison. This is a very positive story, which I appreciate. It's morning. We need to get off on the right foot today, Friday at COP. I want to hear about what's hard, though. I'm sure that with the sprawling and complex global agricultural value chains that you deal with, from local farms to factories, transportation, et cetera, you address some reticence to change entrenched ways of doing business. How do you get past that, and what are the other kind of core challenges that you'd like to highlight in your own operations?
Yeah, I think I just touched on one. I'll expand a little bit. Farmers are aware that their data is valuable. So talking to a farmer about change practices, telling them we'd like for them to put their data into a platform, that takes some convincing. Because it's something that they don't do as a part of their core business. They don't necessarily trust what anybody's going to do with the data. I would say another challenge is when we talk about something like carbon, they think about carbon credits, and some farmers have had bad experiences. They've been promised that they're going to be generating these valuable credits, and they never really see that come to fruition, and they learn that the requirements of doing something like soil sampling and permanence and additionality, the types of carbon accounting requirements that would apply, are really daunting for them, and so they have a lot of skepticism about that. We pay a premium. We actually give more money per bushel or acre for these sustainable or regenerative practices. That's pretty attention-getting. But we would like to see the marketplace show us and show the farmer that this is something that is valuable, and the consumer's willingness to pay for something that has a regenerative aspect to it or a sustainable aspect to it in the food space still remains to be seen. So that's another big challenge for us, is to work with this customer that's so consumer facing to help to educate customers and consumers as well.
Thanks. I think you've hit on a real theme of this COP, which is the onerousness of some of the processes that lead to the capital that these smallholder farmers in your case, or in other cases, people in other sectors that require this capital, whether it's coming from carbon credits or elsewhere, the process for navigating that and the timelines involved and the uncertainties involved are all steep impediments that we're hearing in different stripes, I think, across the COP27 landscape. I want to move on to Catherine at this point. Catherine, you've been really explicit about Duke Energy's climate strategy and business strategy being one and the same. So what do you mean by that? And embedded in that question, how do you balance the interests of ratepayers, investors, business development colleagues, and the like with your decarbonization goals, which are fairly ambitious?
Yeah, well, thank you. Maybe since not everyone may be familiar with Duke Energy as opposed to the university, Duke Energy is the largest utility in the United States. We do have a commitment to net zero. Currently, 95% of our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are part of that aspiration to achieve net zero. When we talk about our climate strategy as our business strategy, I think this is a unique statement for me to be able to make. I've worked in sustainability for a long time, and I think historically I'm trying to figure out how to make it relevant is the wrong word, but kind of relevant to the business decisions at hand. And at Duke, when we look at our $145 billion capital plan over the next decade, 85% of it is dedicated towards modernizing the grid, cleaning the energy system, and making it cleaner and greener. So it's a really exciting time to be specifically in the energy sector. As we think about all of our stakeholders as a regulated utility, we've got to bring everyone along with us. We just commissioned a study with EY, kind of looking at net, what are the benefits of our clean energy transition? Because I think historically, at least in the US, the discussion has been, yes, we would like to get to a cleaner energy system, but what is the cost? And we wanted to kind of challenge that assumption. And so when we took a step back and we looked at the benefits that our clean energy transition will bring in terms of additional jobs, et cetera, we found that there is roughly almost a 2x, a $250 billion economic output positive impact as a result of our clean energy transition, which is cool.
What kind of ammunition does that give you in the boardroom, having a number like that?
It's incredibly powerful, but I would set aside the boardroom. To me, when I think about the pace of decarbonization, we tend to talk about net zero at a very high, kind of almost academic level. And sometimes, although I will say at this COP, I've been hearing a lot more of discussion around what is a just transition, what is environmental justice, but sometimes we kind of look at what's going to work on paper, and then we put blinders on when it comes to impacts to people, although this has been touched on in this panel, which is really affirming. And so I tend to think about, when I'm talking about just transition, when I'm talking about environmental justice, ensuring that I'm telling that holistic story of, as we retire coal, we're leading the largest planned retirement of coal, for example, in the US. As we're talking about those impacts to very specific communities in our service territory, I want to also show up and be talking about the benefits of what's coming.
Right, excellent. Duke Energy builds projects with long time horizons and high capital expenditures. Anecdotally, my neighbor works for Duke Energy, and I'm always marveling at the amount of capital and the time horizons of the projects he's working on. How do you make investment decisions that are decadal in scope and also meet near-term needs, and at the same time set foundations for next-generation nuclear, hydrogen, advanced storage, CCUS, et cetera, that we might not see actually have those decarbonization impacts in the near term, but that are essential ultimately to put us on that kind of footing?
Yeah, it was one of the most interesting things as I transitioned from the CPG space to energy, is the time horizons are just fundamentally different for what we're dealing with. I think what we're trying to do is look at what are the necessary steps we can take today to prepare for the resilient grid that we need tomorrow. Forgive me, you're all probably smarter about the energy system than I am, but when the energy system in the US was first designed, you had a big power plant, and then you had transmission, and then you had distribution, and energy kind of flowed one direction. In this new world that we're going to operate in, we've got distributed energies. So you can have a solar plant here, you can have an advanced nuclear facility there, and so you've got to build, you can have EV charging at all different hours of the day. And so you've got to build a much more modernized, advanced grid. So when we look at the next decade, a significant investment of our $145 billion in operating on jet lag and about 2 hours of sleep. So forgive me if it's wrong, but roughly half of that is directed in the next decade to modernizing the grid so that we're able to kind of, no matter what technology really emerges, are able to have a system that basically operates effectively with that technology. We're looking at a significant build out of batteries, a significant build out of renewables. We've committed to 30,000 megawatts of renewables by 2035. The battery storage that we put in our carbon plan represents roughly 4x the amount of battery storage technology available in the US today. So it's a significant build out on that front.
Thank you. We're going to return to some of those grid issues certainly later in the conversation. Now I want to move to you, Nicholas. Similarly to my past questions, I want to start with something fairly specific. Volvo led recently an ambitious collaboration called Volvo Lights. This is more than a dozen public and private organizations. It built a blueprint for commercializing the supply chains for electric trucks. So how did this come together? What did you learn from it? Can these types of partnerships across not just the supply chain, but the entire ecosystem of stakeholders, including consumers, notably, be scaled?
Thank you, Jackson. And thank you all of you for bearing with the only non-American panelist this morning, but I'll do my best. So I'm from Sweden, from Göteborg, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's the way you say it.
Yeah. So Volvo, just to start with that a little bit, because we are always confused with the passenger car Volvo, which share the same brand name, but we actually divested Volvo Cars from Volvo Group 20 years back. We are still confusing the rest of the world with this, but we are two different companies. So we are into the heavy-duty class 6, 7, 8 trucks and buses and construction equipment. And we are headquartered in Göteborg in Sweden, but we are truly global company, 190 countries. We call US our second home, and we are really proud of having, of course, Volvo trucks, which is, by the way, the only truck brand that you can find in Egypt, in US, in South America, in Europe, of course, but also in Asia, worldwide. It's the only brand. We are even more proud to have actually the Mack truck brand in our family since 20 years back. So that's also part of the group. All Mack trucks and Volvo trucks that you can find in US is actually built in US, and some Americans tends to like that compared to any other brand in US which is built elsewhere. So, well, coming to the point then, electromobility is the key now, of course, and Volvo Group, we have a global commitment to be completely fossil-free by 2040. So one of the biggest challenges is, of course, in scope 3, because we are shifting from fossil diesel to different renewables, and I will tell you a little bit about it. It's battery electric, it's fuel cell electric, and to some extent also sustainable biofuels. But it's much harder than that, and that is hard, but it's much harder than that because it's fully fossil-free throughout our supply chain. COP here is in many occasions talking about the supply chain challenges. We have 50,000 first-tier suppliers, and that's a challenge to convert that, and then we have millions of suppliers below that, obviously. So huge challenge. Triggering thing in US for getting Volvo to get started on the electromobility journey was California, and the LIGHTS project, as we call it, as Jackson just referred to. So that stands for Low Impact Green Heavy Transport Solutions. And this is then the California climate investment that is putting billions of cap and trade dollars to work. And it's a big project for Volvo. As Jackson said, it's more than 12 other companies besides Volvo Group and South Coast Air Quality Management District who is leading this, and it's a total project cost of million US dollars, and we were funded by almost 50% of that from California. So thank you very much for that. So we have now up and running 30 battery electric heavy duty trucks there, and 58 chargers up and running in California. They are saving some 207,000 gallons of diesel every year, and it's a success, we must say, for California, for our customers, for the whole community, moving goods between the ports and inland warehouses. And it's a huge difference to air quality in California, and you know the LA part of California is really needing that. So and it's also a huge step for climate change, because we need to go to battery electric and fuel cell electric, obviously. And it's a huge step for Volvo Group, because we are European based and we are for sure going electric in Europe. But this one project in California actually pushed us as a company to go as quickly as we do in Europe. We do that in US as well. Yeah.
You know, there's when I was looking into Volvo Lights, there's some amazing footage of the different participants there, and what really stuck out to me was how so many of them, from people in the Port Authority to people elsewhere in the supply chain, saying this would have never happened without a coordinated effort. That this, you know, that this, if we were all just in our own lanes trying to pursue our own policies, then we would have never come together on this. I thought that was really illuminating.
Absolutely, and we are 14 partners, and no one is there just for fun or just to support things, you know, because it's a good thing to do. Everyone has a role to play, and it's a lot of coordination, of course, and a lot of pain, honestly. You know, public-private partnership, PPP. Sometimes I'm adding 1/4 P to that, and that is pain, because it is a challenge.
I heard someone add people on a panel earlier this week, so maybe we need 5.
I like people, Jackson. That's better. Yeah, maybe. But it is really, and I can tell you a bit, if you like, on all these challenges on coordinating and how to work together and so on.
Please.
If I have a minute.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, great. So it's really a holistic ecosystem approach to this partnership, and I won't count up all partners here, but all of them are really putting their shoulders to it, and what you need to do is to get all the partners together, but then you also need to come up with this plan for each individual site and for each customer driving a truck. Otherwise nothing is moving by itself, and you need to find the right competence, also outside of this club of 14 companies and institutions and what have you, universities. And that is, you know, for the electric vehicle equipment as such. It's for charging, it's for energy, it's for financing, it's for engineering, assistance with grants. It's a lot of different competencies that you need also to put into that circle. You need to have a project team and appoint a project leader and run it like any kind of project in big companies. You know, it's and you need to go to each and every point and actually, what do we do here? What do we do next week? What do we do next month? Power utility companies, for instance, you know, you need to engage for real and get everyone into it. Otherwise, it's simply not happening. You need to prepare for unexpected delays, because they will come. It's a lot of hurdles that on you know, supply chain constraints that we fight with every day, permits and power on and stuff like that. And then also to optimize the operation as such when you have the trucks and charging systems up and running. You know, what is the range of this specific truck? What is the battery capacity and everything, all of that? And what is the need from the customer? Where is the warehouse? Where is the port? You know, it's a lot of things, and it's a lot of data analytics to it, of course.
Yeah, thanks. We're kind of knee deep in part of that, which is as part of the Energy Pathways USA project. We're currently modeling some of these net zero considerations, and one that's particularly tough is this intersectional space between the grid and between EV penetration and gains. So, Nicholas, I'm jumping ahead a bit here because we're going to conclude with thoughts on the Inflation Reduction Act across our panel, but I want to make sure I get your take specifically. So the IRA has domestic content provisions in the U.S. for production and processing of materials. These are particularly essential for EVs and for battery inputs specifically. So how is Volvo evaluating the effects of these provisions on your supply chains? What effect do you see them having on broad U.S. decarbonization efforts? And I love that you're from Sweden because Europe doesn't like this very much. So please, you can give us the breadth of perspectives that you think are relevant for us to understand here.
This is what is so great of being a global company. So if Europe doesn't like it, it's not the European-based company that doesn't necessarily like it. I mean, we are a U.S. company for real, so we love IRA, I can tell you. No, but it's interesting, I think, you know, protectionism, if you like, and politics and trade stuff and so on and so on. It's really challenging, but all in all, we are talking climate. We don't have any time to just wait for each other and move exactly the same pace, and you know. So IRA, great. We are really scaling up our supply chain now in US, and it's so much to do. You know, it's everything with battery electric. It's fuel cell electric also, which is another technology coming, which we think will be complementary to battery electric because the real heavy duty vehicles, long distance, no time to stop and charge and so on. That's where the green hydrogen will play in. Also where the infrastructure people might, you know, it can be successful with the grid and the charging stations in some states, but maybe not in all states at the same time. So we think there is no one silver bullet, that we'll need both fuel cells and battery electric. We don't need the flies, but okay. So we actually began taking orders then for Volvo trucks back in December 2020 already for these VNR electric trucks, beautiful things. And also on the Mack LR electric, we are up and running on that. So production of Class 8 trucks is up and running, but the scaling up, that's where the IRA is coming in big time. And also not only in the vehicles and the vehicle technology, but also of course in charging and green hydrogen and fueling of green hydrogen to fuel cell trucks. Just to end with, First Movers Coalition is a big thing here also in Egypt, right, and in the COP. Great initiative by Secretary Kerry together with the World Economic Forum, driving this transition on a very focused way, utilizing the purchasing power of different companies, which is a tool actually I don't think we used too much, honestly, in industry. But gathering all the chief purchasing officers, you know, chief procurement officers, they have the control of a lot of money, you know. Getting those men and women to actually direct that investment into green is a strong tool. So join us in First Movers Coalition, guys.
Sure, thank you very much. Certainly a strong tool. It's interesting to look in industrial sectors at the power of procurement just from governments as well.
Yeah,
it's sort of a place where the intersection really happens. If governments tweak their requirements on purchasing things like concrete and steel, they're often the largest purchasers in some major economies around the world of those products. So
exactly. I mean, 70% of our CO2 footprint in the truck is actually from steel. You know, it's a lot of steel in a truck. So, and now we're up and building fossil-free steel trucks already and machines, yellow machines. So it can move quickly, just from COP26 in Glasgow up until now, and it's up and running.
Fantastic. I want to move to you, Roger, for the final part of this section of the panel. I'm interested in the growing intersection at GE between digital and industrial operations. Now, this isn't, of course, new. GE has been at the forefront of technological development since its inception and is essential to the build-out in the United States of our industrial base in many ways. But I do think that what we're seeing from an outsider's perspective at least are some developments that are driving new opportunities for decarbonization, both for GE and for its customers. So what do you see as some core information technology needs for U.S. decarbonization, and what's GE doing about it?
Well, Jackson, thank you. And first of all, congratulations on the release of the Energy Pathways report. I know you had shared the efforts, over the last year or so with us, and it's great to see it out, and a really impressive accomplishment. It's making a huge impact, and we completely support your efforts there. So congratulations on getting that done. That's got to feel good, and it's an honor to be here on a big day with you to get the chance to share some of these ideas. And thank you for the question. I have to say, you're the first person to ask me about the digital side of our business, so I was really excited to come in and chat. I was going to pick up on some of the things Catherine was talking about too, but if you think you have a hard time explaining Volvo, I'll challenge you on that, because it's even harder to explain GE, I think. But so one of our businesses, GE Vernova, is responsible for powering about 1/3 of the world's energy. GE is a 130-year-old business founded by Thomas Edison. As you mentioned, Jackson, our theme's always been how can we innovate technology to lift up the quality of life for people everywhere through healthcare, aviation, transportation, and of course energy. So our technology today powers about 1/3 of the world's energy in 170 countries. We're focused on kind of a singular mission to decarbonize the energy sector through innovation and technology. But at the same time, we want to make sure we're increasing access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity, make the energy grid more resilient. As Catherine was talking about, there's 750 million people in the world who lack access. We want kids to turn the lights on, parents to have access to jobs and healthcare and those types of things where energy is all essential. And so the reason I was so excited about your question is because it's very easy for us to talk about renewable energies. We've got pictures of our turbines there on the wall, and gas power and grid, which I do want to talk about. But the digital part is kind of the unsung hero. So it was nice to hear the question, because my experience, the more I've gotten to learn about this technology, is how much we take for granted how hard it is to keep the lights on. And especially as we're facing more challenges with the grid, as Catherine talked about, she talked about kind of the variabilities of introducing renewables, that we now have two-way grids. Grids were designed to be one way. You produce electricity and you send it somewhere, but now electrons are flowing in all directions. So you have the variability of renewables. You have increased weather events, which puts the grid under more pressure. You have the increasing demand from electrification of vehicles, and you have cybersecurity. And so you have these kind of challenges that are coming at the same time we're trying to decarbonize the energy sector, but the grid's under more threat. And we're seeing that with energy security issues all around the world. Ukraine and Europe being a prime example of that right now. And so the most immediate thing you could do if you want to build energy resiliency, if you want to address those kind of threats and risks, the most immediate thing you can do is to digitize the grid and bring in those digital solutions. And so I think it is an unsung hero, and it's something that is increasingly important as we make this energy transition, the role of grid. And we see digital coming in three ways. Is how do you kind of actively manage the electrons in real time, in microseconds? Digital works much faster than the human brain, of course. How do you use digital to improve efficiency? And then also, how do you use it to kind of be more lean in your manufacturing so you're more sustainable at the same time? And I think, the real focus today is this active management, the notion that with the variability of renewables and weather events and cybersecurity, having digital substations, digital tools that can manage the flow of electrons in real time, predict where something's going to go wrong, reroute energy, predict weather events, bring up and down generating resources. That's where digital is really key. And beyond just digital, the grid is really the hard part of this. We're doing well on renewable energy. We can talk about breakthrough technologies. We have a pathway for that. But getting all of this to work together comes through the new generation of grid. And what we do on the grid is really the hard stuff, which is how you manage this in real time, HVDC and things like that. So I think it's a really important question. I'm glad you're raising it, and I think we need to spend more time talking about it, frankly.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. And I'm going to go ahead because I think that you started to intersect some with what Catherine was talking about. You mentioned that you wanted to react to some things that you've heard. No time like the present. What's on your mind?
Well, I think, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, we're as excited as anybody else here, and we're happy to see the strong start by the administration on the implementation of it. And I think a lot of us are working together, including with the Energy Pathways Coalition, on how we can make sure we're a united front in seeing the successful implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. And part of that is, frankly, we want to make this go as easy for the government as possible. We're not bogging them down, pointing arrows at each other. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to be coordinating together and sharing more to come on that. But I think this will be not just for industry and companies, but with NGOs, think tanks, trade associations all coming together with a singular goal. And we saw that, frankly, last week with the first set of comments that were filed. Almost everything I saw being fully constructive, and I think a lot of that was that coordination. So the Inflation Reduction Act clearly, as everyone's talked about, such a significant, profound opportunity, not only for the U.S., but you mentioned the tension with the European Union, and I loved your response to that, because we're hearing tension from the politicians, but the companies, the European companies, are all in these meetings saying this is terrific. And our focus would be, how do we make the carrots approach to the Inflation Reduction Act a template for the rest of the world, whether that's the European Union or Egypt or emerging economies. There's a lot to learn there in terms of using that as the path forward to help finance this type of energy transition. I think the other thing that's on our mind is, we can talk about the technology today, renewable energy, grid, gas, and our goal this decade, working with Duke and our customers to deploy it as rapidly as we can to reduce emissions. But we know that's not enough. We make, GE's proud of making some of the world's best technology, but the technology we make today is not going to get us to net zero. It's going to move us in that direction, but we do have to develop the breakthrough technologies for tomorrow, technologies that we're working on today that we might not see till late this decade or even early the following decade, but we have to be like a time machine, inventing them now and in the lab. So we're very excited about small modular reactors, small modular nuclear reactors. That has gotten huge traction and momentum over the last 18 months. We make the BWRX, which I think is in the lead right now. Many places in the world really investing a lot of effort into seeing small modular nuclear reactors deployed, say 2027, 2028. Hydrogen as a fuel. Really excited about this. This will be my favorite COP27 moment. On Sunday and Tuesday, we'll be going to the Sharm el-Sheikh power plant, where we will run a gas turbine on a hydrogen blend for the first time for the African continent. I don't know how long we'll be able to do it. It's hard to get the hydrogen here, but the point is the infrastructure and the precedent of being able to set that up for the first time in Egypt, in Africa, demonstrates that the emerging economies are invested too in breakthrough technologies. This is not a US-EU thing. We want everyone to be invested in the breakthrough technologies. And then, of course, carbon capture and sequestration, and then a bunch of exciting technology going on in the aviation sector too, to decarbonize aviation, sustainable aviation fuel, open fan technology, hybrid electric technology, and hydrogen technology. So a lot of exciting things to come on aviation as well.
Thanks so much, Roger. And you ended right where I was going to prompt you next, which is on these emergent technologies. 2027 for a small modular reactor, that's very impressive. Another personal anecdote, I grew up in the shadow of a nuclear power plant that took about 30 years to build, to the chagrin of local communities, certainly. I want to end panel-wide with more thoughts on the IRA specifically, and I want to give the floor back to you, Alex. How is the IRA affecting your thinking and your operations, your strategies for decarbonization, and what are some uncertainties embedded in the IRA that you're grappling with right now?
Well, I would certainly agree with you and many of the other panelists, Roger most recently, that this really is a historic piece of legislation. I know it wasn't perfect, and I'm sure didn't include everything that everybody wanted, but if you think about or if you add up the climate provisions in the IRA and then the infrastructure bill that came before it, it's $500 billion worth of capital. We need more capital, we'll need continued capital, but really landmark. For us, we see enormous opportunity in, as I was saying before, scaling the work that we're doing in the renewables space, and continuing the work that we're doing to try and drive out some of these emerging technologies that I won't run through the list Roger articulated so well. I think I wouldn't call them challenges so much as things that need to play out, and not to get too technical, but there were some technical provisions of the bill around transferability of credits. Some of the, I know everybody didn't quite get what they wanted in terms of the direct pay, but that being available for tax-exempt entities. It'll be interesting to see how some of these provisions come together. We do think the transferability will probably open up business opportunities for our clients and for us, new business opportunities in addition to the tax equity investments that we're doing today to help clients monetize those credits. So I think I would say the headline message is we see enormous opportunity with the bill, and I think some of the details just need to be worked out.
So on that point of the ambiguity in these crediting systems, as a provider of finance, as an investor, is it part of your role to help your clients interpret that and interpret opportunities, or is that kind of a step further than Bank of America is going?
I think it's really part of our role to not so much to interpret it, but to really identify the opportunities for our clients within the various different provisions as more clarity comes out, but also really to help them get creative. We haven't really talked a lot, and I know we're probably ending the end of our session, but we are working really hard to look at creative ways to deploy capital for emerging technologies, and the IRA helps us a great deal in that. And we haven't talked a lot about it, but in emerging economies as well. I mean, Roger just started to hint upon it in his last comments. That's been a big focus of ours at COP, is how do we bring different types of capital together to really drive progress in emerging economies.
Yeah, thanks. And Secretary Kerry here has been quite explicit about trying to draw a line between domestic efforts in the U.S. through the IRA and those international efforts to enhance the lot of developing economies. Thank you so much. Yes. Allison, similar question. What in the IRA is most important to you?
Yeah, it may seem odd, since I've talked about nature-based solutions so far, that this would have relevance to our company or the agriculture sector, but it certainly does. When we talk about sequestration of carbon in soils, which I was talking about earlier, that's about 0.5 metric ton per acre. 1 million acres, 1,000 farms is about 330,000 metric tons of carbon sequestered. So we got a lot of work to do on that front. The IRA is actually very helpful in our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which are very relevant in an agriculture company. We process agricultural ingredients. We're a large thermal energy user. This is why we've been operating carbon capture and storage for over a decade. And we've been sequestering what's called biogenic emissions from an ethanol plant. We did this partnership with the Department of Energy, so public-private partnerships are very important in our sector as well, but over a decade ago. So we know that this is safe, we know that we can do this, and we're looking for these technologies that will help us to expand these types of operations beyond biogenic, which is pure CO2, to separating and capturing CO2 from energy production, for instance. So we're very excited about that kind of development. We're now the popular kids at the table after the IRA came out, because we operate carbon capture and storage, and so many emerging technologies want to meet us and to figure out whether their technology can be utilized along with carbon capture. And since we have an operating facility, we have a lot of people inquiring about that. There's CO2 pipelines that are now real and under development and investment, and we're an investor in some of those activities as well. We'll be expanding wells for our carbon capture facility, which we had not anticipated before all of this interest in this technology. As a large thermal energy user, I love all of the conversation about modular nuclear, about hydrogen. We have feasibility studies going on in our company right now. We don't consider ourselves an energy company, but we're rapidly becoming one, because we have to figure out a way to decarbonize all of our supply chains, which means from the farm to the processing and through our transportation networks as well. So this is a tremendous, tremendous advancement for us. We're really looking forward to taking advantage of a lot of the activity in the ecosystem around the IRA.
That's an interesting frame, saying ADM's rapidly becoming an energy company. We're going to borrow that for the next report. Thank you. Catherine, I want to ask you about the IRA, specifically around the grid. You know, the grid came up in your conversation. Roger mentioned it as well. There are different provisions in the IRA around enhancing grid effectiveness. There's some capital, not just to invest in the building of infrastructure, but to build the soft capacities, let's say, of managing the grid. So what are the core grid challenges for decarbonization, and what does the IRA do about it?
I'm going to answer a slightly different question.
Go ahead, answer whatever you want. Yeah.
So when I think about some of the barriers to getting to net zero as quickly as possible, I'm going to highlight some of the stuff Roger talked about. Some of the technologies that we need are nascent. So from my perspective, what the IRA really helps us do is it essentially, so as a regulated utility, we're mandated by law to build least cost. So that trumps everything. And what the IRA does is it flips the script a little bit, and it enables us to think about renewables, investments in the grid, et cetera, towards that net zero future that we need. And it defrays the costs that customers will be paying, which is so important, because if we lose sight of affordability, if we lose sight of reliability, I think we will halt forward momentum significantly. So the IRA, I think, plays a really fundamental role in that cost piece. But flipping back to something that Alex said on IIJA, and to build on a point Roger made, we've got technology in the future that we need to see scale, we need to see get commercialized, we need to know can operate safely on today's grid system. And so what IIJA does is it really pulls forward some of those technologies, we believe, into a much kind of closer near-term timeline, which is really what's going to be critical and is going to enable us to kind of almost leapfrog towards net zero much faster.
Thank you. And ending on that with that forward-looking vision and with an emphasis on people, I think is perfect. And we're going to wrap up the panel there. I just want to say one closing word, which is our partnership, Energy Pathways USA, is only as strong as the insights from our members who have been instrumental in the production of our materials and will continue to be in the future. And I think we saw some of that on display here today. So good luck to all of you. These are very ambitious endeavors that you're involved with. We're here to help in the modest ways that we can. We look forward to working with you in the future. Please join me in thanking our panel members.